You know, D never really ceases to amaze me with how out there they can get when it comes to going from a frame design to actually making a kit around said design. Spooky Lass here is a good example, concepted as a manipulator of interdimensional portals. So you know, a pretty basic design. So what, does she maybe use those portals to bring in some horrifying summoned beings? Maybe a giant portal that yeets enemies into a hell pit of suffering? And an eternity of trying to farm for the Zyphos? Well, you're close, but you're actually far off. Nah, Wisp decides to do a Stardew and grow some kush plants with her powers. I mean, heresy to say, but I think I could think of a few better ways to use her concept than that. Although, rubbing Solaris' massive flaming beam dick over Corpus kind of makes up for it. So hey, it balances out. Anyways, Wisp was highly anticipated, especially with her visual design and assets. For example, she has this ethereal design going on with some very nice built-in cloth physics. She also utilizes custom animations, which are a nice treat to have because the show is Wisp also enforces a theory of mine that I've had for quite a while. That all Warframe players are legally blind. It's okay, my vision died when Limbo came out. So what do I think of the lass with the ass, the thighs that fry eyes, the operator of the demonetization station? She's fine. You know those frames that everyone seems to really love, but you just don't seem to have as much enthusiasm for it as others? Wisp is kind of that frame for me if we're talking about her actual kit performance. She's just kind of okay in my book. We'll explain why in a moment, but first off, for clarification, what do I think makes a good frame? Well, one focus a frame could have is if they're capable of rendering huge chunks of enemies into piles of red paste so pulpified that the Worm Queen wouldn't even touch that shit in a quickly and timely manner, I would likely consider them to be pretty damn good. The name of the game is dealing with hordes. It's why I consider frames like Equinox and Mesa to be so damn effective at most of what the game has to offer. However, another focus is if a frame has really solid crowd control. Sure, damage right now is the meta, but let's face it, if a Vauban can plop down one of his Bacilles and render an entire enemy force a non-factor, I would say that's still pretty damn good. Another focus would be if the frame provides good team support. Hera's crit boosting powers, Hildren's mass armor strip, Rhino's roar, the entirety of the control button destroyer that is Octavia, and frames tend to dip their toes into multiple of these focuses. It's rare to have a frame that is purely a damage dealer, or purely a crowd controller, or purely a support. Frames usually can serve some other secondary purpose. Harrow has some crowd control, Hildren has some damage potential, etc. and so on. So for the most part, I usually consider a frame good depending on their effectiveness within these particular roles. And Wisp is just kind of okay in every area. Alright, so before her fan base introduces me to a bullet and turns me into Asper the Shitty Ghost, I should probably get into Wisp already. So first off, passive. Whenever you're in the air, it rewards you for brushing off those old school bunny hopping skills by granting invisibility. Although, I fail to see how turning into a Thanos snap victim and farting out projectile effects conjures ideas of stealth. I can see her pretty damn well if you ask me. Only one criticism with her passive. Why do you lose it when you shoot silenced weaponry? You know how Ivara keeps her prowl if her weapon is silent? Yeah, Wisp's passive should work like that. Why is that? Because her second ability is much more convenient stealth that also lets you shoot. Sure, it has an energy cost, but we live in
insert current gear here.
Energy isn't exactly difficult to come across. It's one of those passives that feels less like a passive that augments the kit and more of just a thing that's just there. But the fuck do I know? I'm sure someone out there uses bunny hopping Wisp for spy vaults now. As for actual abilities, her one spawns some spupas that can be picked up, offering some pretty nice, albeit some standard buffs. One mote gives max HP and constant health regeneration, another gives a speed boost to both movement, attack, and fire speed, and one is electricity, which sucks Guardian ass for crowd control. I'll get into that later. Overall, not much to complain about here. It's a bit bothersome that you can't place the motes at your crosshair, because that would make her synergetic properties with her 3 a bit more usable when you're moving from a lot of areas, such as on bounties on Plains of Eidolon. But But to be fair, that is why you have her second ability. Luckily, DE seems to be aware that not every mission is going to have you standing around for infinite refreshing of the moats. So, the moat's duration when you're away from the Kush Grove is very fair. All the moats sport a duration of 30 seconds at base. Each moat also offers underlying bonuses. The health moat means that using Hunter's Adrenaline/Rage is stupid easy. The speed moat offers a damage increase in the form of attack speed buffs, and the electric one, well, I don't know about that one, Chief. Other than that, each moat also boosts your Dick Destroyer laser in some way. Vitality and Shock moats give 25% damage each, and the Haste lets it deal corrosive procs. Now, health and speed moats are nice, but I feel that the Shock moat is severely lacking. And this is down to how Shock procs work in a general sense, not just with the moat. The problem with using electric procs for crowd control is this: you can't shock an enemy that is in the middle of being shocked. In other words, if you see the enemy in this animation, you cannot refresh the electric stun. You must wait for it to wear off before applying it again. This is almost unheard of in the crowd control spectrum, and it has been annoying me for many years. There's only one exception that I know of. If you use Volts 1 on an enemy and then hit them with 4, the 4 will still shock them for the full duration of the 4. Though it's worth mentioning that Volts 4 also can't be refreshed on enemies as well. Now, in all fairness, this also applies to other types of status proc crowd control, such as Blast. But at least with Blast, that makes some semblance of goddamn sense. How the fuck you knock someone over who's already eating shit? This is why I'm not a fan of the electric moat. Now, to DE's credit, they attempted to make it so that whenever the moat sends out an electric proc, they tried to time the shock with the enemies coming out of the stun. It's a janky workaround that also doesn't work. Claps all around. And the reason why it doesn't work is that enemies have varying animations for being shocked, all of different lengths. So you basically flip a coin every time as to whether the restun will actually work. This means that there's almost zero reason to bother using shock moats outside of boosting the laser. It would actually be quite handy if the moat plants themselves could cause shocks as well. This way, you could plant down multiple plants in a specific area and the shocks would cover each other. This would help the restun issue quite a lot. But alas, that is not the case. So enjoy your juicy damage ticks that are worth a whole 1 damage. So, DE, get on this, okay? Thank you. Loves and kisses. Her 2 is her most meh ability, but unlike some other abilities, for example, this is actually useful. It sends out an aggro drawing decoy while also acting as a teleport, but its most useful application is with her 3. Luckily, there's not much else to talk about with her 2, so we can just carry on carrying on. Her 3 is a debuff that causes enemies to occasionally spawn little damage-dealing orbs whenever they take damage, while guaranteeing spawns when the enemy is killed. Additionally, damage thrown at the enemy is used to determine the damage of the orb. Oh yeah, and the cast wave also blinds targets, further pushing shock moats into a state of irrelevancy that's equal to that of fidget spinner mobile games. This ability, in my opinion, needs just a little bit more. A huge problem that it has is that orbs cannot summon other orbs. So, if you were like me, you may have thought that if you one-shot an enemy, that corpse would spawn an orb, which would kill an enemy, which would then spawn an orb, which would kill another enemy, and so on and so forth until the group affected by her 3 were dead. Kinda like a deadly ping pong ball. And this wouldn't be broken or anything either. Her 3 doesn't get enemies through walls, and eventually the ball will either get stuck or hit an enemy that isn't affected by her 3 debuff, ending the chain. If they wanted to, they could even give orbs spawned by other orbs a diminishing returns value. So, for example, maybe a single kill can only link up to about 4 extra kills before the orb would no longer appear or something. The limitation of only getting orbs if you kill the target without an orb ruins a lot of the fun setups I had in mind to use with the ability. I can understand if something like, say, Revenant's geysers don't make more geysers via his orbs because of how long they stay out and how they keep rapidly spawning the orbs, but Wisp's surge orbs are one and done deals. It's not exactly a bad ability, but keep in mind, we're on her 3rd ability now, and so far nothing has really stood out as a crowning jewel within her kit. Her buffs are nice, don't get me wrong, but nothing that makes her stand out. out. And her 2 is just kind of there for her 3. But we're coming up to her 4. Also, D, is there any particular reason why Revenant's geyser orbs don't have scaling like this? Like, you murder a thrall and it uses the damage to scale up the damage of the orbs in the geysers? Orb kills can't spawn geysers or anything, so it wouldn't break shit. Just saying, D, it would be a really, really good idea. Tell you what, if you do it, I promise I will not bitch about Revenant for a total of 6 months. Do me proud, D. Lastly, we have the most exciting part of her kit, copyright infringement. If anything was going to be the center of abilities kit, it was going to be her 4. And they did try to make it the ability for her. After all, you use her motes to boost its power. And it is strong, right? Like, it's melting these level 100 trashies pretty damn well, but I do have a pretty big complaint. Given the narrowness of this ability, I feel like 2 things need to happen. 1, it should have a form of scaling, or 2, its tick rate should be much higher. So to reiterate, the beam can ravage your usual trash, and that's great. The base damage of the ability is fantastic. But look at how little it does to heavies of the same level. Its scaling leaves much to be desired. And keep in mind, this was with all 3 motes circling it and keeping the beam channeled. This is where I take issue. The linear nature of the beam in relation to its damage output. The less area a power covers, the more damage it should put out, because you're focusing all of it into a smaller section of the tile. By the way, I'm running 180% power strength, and that's not counting energy conversion, which was also being utilized in these clips. I'm sure a big dick strength build would do better, but I don't think Wisp is the type of frame who benefits as much from max power strength as certain other frames. Now, I wouldn't be fussing about this as much if it wasn't for the energy cost needed to sustain the beam. Let's compare to Excalibur's Exalted Blade. Excalibur has an incredibly small drain on his 4, and it doesn't have to deal with the restriction of having to spend extra energy just to use its full powered form, unless you count channeling, but I don't. And yet, Excal will just decimate these groups far faster than what Wisp can. And I feel that this is a little bit unfair, because Wisp has higher energy costs, and she has to maintain her moat trio for optimal damage. But all Excalibur has to do is an incredibly quick blind, and then start slicing and dicing. This is why I think that Wisp needs either much faster ticks on her 4, or some kind of scaling power. One of the reasons why Excalibur is so strong is because his 4 can use condition overload. If Wisp had some sort of condition overload built into her 4, this would make it a far better tool. Because when Wisp is all set up, that beam of hers applies a metric fuck ton of status effects. And this includes corrosive. A condition overload type mechanic in her 4 would also encourage more moat usage. And hey, it would give the procs from her shock motes an actual use. Another way to make it better would just to vastly increase the tick count. Remember, this thing is a goddamn laser beam. This thing should be ticking faster than a clock in initial D. A faster tick rate would mean faster corrosive buildup since it's baked into the ability, just as long as you have the proper moat circling you. But in its current state, it feels a little too lackluster. If Wisp had her full powered beam at all times in its current state, with the normal energy cost, I wouldn't really be complaining. But it does suck to be doing this little to heavies with this energy drain after this setup when other frames can just do this. You could say that it's unfair to make the comparison that I'm making. After all, Excalibur has access to a 400% damage boost with his blind. He has the ability to use melee mods on his 4. He can use finishers with his 4, etc, etc. But, a counterpoint. That's exactly why I think her 4 needs work. Her damage numbers don't match the effort or resources going into the power, especially when frames who aren't even specialized DPS machines can also outdamage Wisp. I mean, hell, look at what Hildren can do. Luckily, you can offset this all a bit by using her 3 in tandem with her 4. So, enemies hit by the sun should out carnivorous snitches to attack other enemies. But again, that's just adding yet another step to have half-decent damage. Overall, a lot of people love Wisp and want her to do this to them, but I don't hold the same enthusiasm for her myself. But I don't think she's terrible. I'm kinda struggling to find a way to end this without pissing off the Wisp base, if you couldn't tell. Oh, I know, an old classic. Here you go. I'm gonna go back into cryostasis. Gotta wait for Cyber Keanu.